What would you do if you came back to your cabin only to find a stranger living inside, claiming it now belonged to him simply because his mother, the HOA president, said so? Devon Matthews had just driven for hours straight, hands gripping the wheel, mind focused only on the lake, his cabin, sanctuary. He'd been gone for 2 weeks, finishing a construction job in Birmingham, and already he could feel peace creeping back into his bones as he turned down the winding road that hugged the shoreline. That cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was proof that decades of sweat, long nights, and early mornings had finally paid off. It was his reward, his promise to himself. But as Devon pulled into the gravel driveway, his foot slammed the brake. His front door was wide open. The old rocking chair he'd picked up secondhand swayed back and forth on the porch. And then he saw him, a man, mid-30s, cocky grin, shoes kicked up, lounging in Devon's chair as if he owned the place. Devon killed the engine, slammed the truck door, and stormed up the steps. "Who the hell are you?" he barked, his voice sharp, bracing for an answer that couldn't possibly make sense. The stranger barely shifted, raising a beer before replying, "Name's Brandon. Brandon Whitfield. My mom runs the HOA, so this place, it's mine now." Devon's stomach lurched. "Yours? That's impossible. I paid cash for this cabin. Deeds locked in my truck right now. You think you can just sit here and claim Brandon cut him off, spreading his arms like a king on his throne? Paperwork got sorted. HOA says there was a mistake with the transfer. My mom signed off. Now I'm the rightful owner. You're trespassing." The word hit Devon like a punch. Trespassing. He shoved past Brandon and stormed inside Ollie to freeze. Boxes, his boxes, stacked up and labeled in handwriting that wasn't his. His clothes, tools, photographs, all shoved aside like garbage, as if his life could be packed up and erased in a single afternoon. Devon ripped open a box and pulled out a framed picture, his parents standing proudly with him the day he signed the closing documents. His hands shook. "You had no right," he said through gritted teeth. "This is my home. You don't just throw someone out because your mother thinks she can shuffle papers." Brandon rose slowly, smirk never fading. "Look, man, don't make this ugly. My mom runs things around here. Everyone knows it. If she says this cabin's mine, then it's mine. End of story." The arrogance dripped heavier than his words. Devon clenched his fists, fighting the urge to swing. One wrong move, and they'd paint him as the angry outsider. Instead, he spun around, stormed back to his truck, and yanked out the deed. The paper was worn and wrinkled, folded and unfolded 100 times. But the words were still clear. Devon Matthews, owner. He marched back up the porch and shoved it straight at Brandon. "Read it. Tell me what it says. Tell me who this cabin belongs to." Brandon didn't even glance at the paper. He just laughed. "Deeds don't mean much when the HOA says otherwise. My mom already filed everything. You're done here?" Devon's jaw tightened so hard it ached. For a moment, all he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat. He had worked too long, sacrificed too much to be erased with a single signature from a woman who thought her authority reached farther than the law. Behind Brandon, the old rocking chair creaked. The sound cut into Devon's chest like a blade reminding him this wasn't just a house. This was his peace, his escape from endless construction sites, choking city traffic, and debts he had finally clawed his way out of. And now it was being stolen right in front of him, by people who hadn't lifted a finger to earn it. But Devon didn't yell. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he stepped off the porch, deed still in hand, and looked out over the lake. The water shimmered in the late afternoon sun, calm, steady, untouched by the storm boiling inside him. This isn't over. He whispered so low it was almost lost to the wind. Brandon might have smirked, but Devon wasn't the kind of man to make empty threats. He already knew what needed to be done. He just needed time and a plan. What Devon didn't yet realize was that this fight wouldn't just be about a cabin. It would be about exposing just how far the HOA would go to crush anyone who dared stand in their way. Because long before Devon Matthews laid eyes on that cabin by the lake, his life had been built on sacrifice. He wasn't born into money, and nothing was ever handed to him. He built his world the hard way, brick by brick, job by job. For over 20 years, Devon worked as a contractor, hauling lumber, hanging drywall, crawling under houses and sweating on rooftops through Alabama's brutal summers. His hands carried scars that told his story better than words ever could. Every paycheck, after bills, after child support, after gas for the truck and the tools he couldn't live without, he saved whatever scraps were left. Sometimes it was a few $100s, sometimes only 50. His friends teased him for living lean, for eating frozen meals, for driving an old Ford that rattled every time it hit a pothole. But Devon didn't care. He had one vision that kept him going: owning land that was his and his alone. For years, he bounced from cheap apartments in Montgomery to Mobile, never staying long. Landlords sold buildings, raised rents, shifted the ground beneath his feet. Stability never lasted. Permanence never came. But he promised himself one day he'd wake up in a place where no one, no landlord, no boss, no HOA could take it away. Asterisk that dream owning something no one could take away became Devon's obsession, and it finally took shape when a buddy at work mentioned a small lake cabin for sale just outside Talladega. The place was nothing fancy: 2 bedrooms, a porch in desperate need of repair, and a dock half-rotted into the water. But when Devon drove out to see it, his chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. The cabin sat on a quiet stretch of land, tall pines standing guard around it, the lake shimmering just a stone's throw from the front steps. It wasn't polished, it wasn't big, but it was real. And for Devon, it was a shot at freedom. The asking price was steep for a man like him, but he had saved, sacrificed, and scraped long enough. For the first time in his life, the numbers worked. Within a month, the deal was closed. The day he signed the papers, Devon drove straight to the cabin. He leaned against the railing of that shaky old porch and just breathed. For the first time in decades, he wasn't renting. He wasn't borrowing. He wasn't hustling for someone else's dream. This was his. That evening, he called his sister, Denise in Jackson, who was raising 2 kids on her own. "You finally did it," she said, pride heavy in her voice. "My brother owns lakefront property. Mom and Dad would be smiling down on you. They'd be laughing at how much work that place needs." Devon chuckled. "Yeah, but I don't care. It's mine. Every nail, every boardite, mine." And that was the magic of it. He didn't care about the leaky roof, the rattling plumbing, or the wary looks from neighbors when he first pulled up in his work truck. He was too busy sanding furniture, fixing boards, and teaching himself how to rebuild the dock. Every weekend, he chipped away at it, transforming the cabin piece by piece. But in the back of his mind, there was always one shadow: the HOA. From his very first week, the letters started arriving. Petty nitpicks about things that didn't matter. Your truck is parked too close to the road. Your grass exceeds community length standards. Dock construction must be reviewed before continuing. Devon rolled his eyes, gritted his teeth, and complied. Where he had to. But he noticed something. Not everyone got letters. Neighbors with boats parked halfway on their lawns. No problem. Brandon Whitfield throwing loud parties to cabins down. It's not a single notice. But Devon, the newcomer, the outsider who worked 12-hour days, he got a letter for everything. Still, he shrugged it off. It was worth it. On Friday nights, he'd drive up after work with a cooler in the back seat. He'd open the cabin windows, let the crickets sing, grill chicken on a rusted barbecue, and watch the lake glitter under the moonlight. And he'd think, I finally have a home, where no one can take this from me. That thought gave him peace. Until the day he returned and found Brandon in his chair. Because while Devon saw the cabin as the reward for a lifetime of sacrifice, the HOA saw it as just another piece on their chessboard. And they had no intention of letting him keep it without a fight. If you asked anyone in the lakeside community who really ran things, they wouldn't point to the town council or the county clerk. They'd point to one woman, Karen Whitfield, president of the Lakewood Homeowners Association. Karen wasn't elected because she was kind or fair. She was elected because she was relentless. She thrived on control and she knew how to twist rules until they bent her way. Over the years, neighbors had learned it was easier to nod along than push back. Anyone who tried was buried under letters, crushed with fines, or were smothered by rumors that spread faster than wildfire. And she lived just 3 doors down from Devon's cabin. Karen Whitfield lived in the biggest house on the lake. White siding, a fresh coat of paint every summer, hedges trimmed with surgical precision. To Karen, her home was a castle, and the HOA was her crown. She carried herself with the certainty that her word was laving when it wasn't. The first time Devon met her, she introduced herself as if he should already know her name. I'm Karen Whitfield, president of the HOA. If you need anything, I'm the one you talk to, she said with a thin smile, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. First the old truck, then the worn work boots, then the patched jeans he wore. Without shame. Appreciate it, Devon replied, polite but guarded. He'd dealt with enough controlling personalities on job sites to know exactly what kind of woman he was dealing with. It didn't take long to see her influence in action. At barbecues by the water, conversations hushed the second Karen walked by. At community meetings, she dominated the room, tossing around words like bylaws and standards as if she had written them herself. And, in a way, she had. She's been in charge for 12 years. An older neighbor, Mrs. Green, whispered one evening while they stacked chairs after a meeting. Runs this place like her own little kingdom. If you're in her circle, you're fine. If not, good luck. Devon chuckled nervously, half thinking she was exaggerating. But the very next week, he found another letter taped to his door. This one claimed his dock repairs violated community safety standards. The irony wasn't lost on him. Half the docks on the lake leaned like drunks on a Friday night, but none of those owners had letters slapped on their doors. No, it was always Devon. One Saturday morning, he decided to confront it head-on. Catching Karen during her daily walk, he raised the issue. Ma'am, I keep getting these notices about my cabin, but I see plenty of folks doing the same things without a problem. What gives? Karen's smile stayed fixed, but her eyes hardened. Devon, I'm just enforcing the rules. If others are out of line, I'll deal with them when the time comes. Until then, I expect you to follow the bylaws like everyone else. Everyone else, Devon pressed. Or just me? Her smile widened, sharp as broken glass. Don't make this personal. The words stuck with him, because, from where he stood, it already was. Neighbors whispered stories in hushed tones. How Karen had blocked fence permits, rejected paint colors, even forced one family to tear down a brand new deck. Yet her son, Brandon, he lived under a different set of rules. His lawn grew wild for weeks. His parties roared until sunrise. His friends parked wherever they wanted, and through it all, no letters, no fines, nothing. The favoritism wasn't even subtle. Brandon strutted around the neighborhood like a prince, brushing off complaints with a smirk. More than once, Devon overheard him brag, "HOA doesn't touch me. I've got immunity." Asterisk, it made Devon's blood boil, but he bit his tongue. He reminded himself he wasn't there to pick fights. He was there to enjoy his cabin, fix it up, and carve out a little piece for himself. So he ignored the petty notices, filed them away in a drawer, went on with his work. Still, one question gnawed at him. What happens when Karen decides peace isn't enough? The answer came the day he found Brandon sitting on his porch. By then, Devon had realized Karen wasn't just meddling. She was orchestrating something bigger. She had the power, the influence, and the arrogance to believe she could take what wasn't hers and get away with it. But what she didn't count on was that Devon wasn't the type to roll over. He was the type who documented everything. Years of subcontractors, shady clients, and city permits had taught him one thing: a signature could make or break you. And that's why, the day he bought the cabin, Devon made copies of every single feed. You know, all Silda made seed. Every single seed of our made, all laid last of our long-lasting color. Sade sleek clients, and city collies, and city Collins, and city permots made sigh. 8, 6, made sigh, made side. We see made, with Sade sigh. By we see it, gate, by collas. We see it to be like to see it's odd. I can all see it. Live sick it's a reset. Bid sick a seeky to be I leap it at I. Gets it to die to it it's I. It's sit the I these and to this est that this to the licks to the pests to paper deed, closing documents. Tax receipts hand kept them in a heavy-duty folder in his truck. So when Brandon tossed out the word trespassing, Devon's mind immediately shifted to defense. The next morning, he drove straight into town and stopped at the county records office. Sean, the clerk, barely 25, pulled up the property file. "Here it is," Sean said, turning the monitor toward him. Devon leaned in. His name was there. Owner, Devon Matthews. Relief washed over him, then vanished just as quickly, because right below it was a new document, a transfer notice, dated just last week, signed by none other than Karen Whitfield. Devon's jaw tightened. How is that even possible? I never signed anything. Nobody asked me for permission. Sean frowned. It looks like there was a correction filed. Claims the original deed had errors, and that the property should have been under the Whitfield name. Usually these things get cleared up, but what? Devon pressed. Sean lowered his voice. Most people don't have the HOA president pushing paperwork for them, Mrs. Whitfield. She's got influence. Stuff gets processed faster when her name's on it. Devon stared at the screen, the room suddenly shrinking around him. Half his life, he'd worked for that cabin. And now it had been snatched away with the stroke of a pen. Later that afternoon, he confronted Karen directly. She was pruning flowers in her yard, oversized sunglasses on her face. Sun hat tilted just so like she belonged at a country club, not a lakeside community. "You want to tell me why my deed's got your signature on it?" Devon asked, voice steady but tight. Karen didn't flinch. "Oh, Devon, I figured you'd find out eventually. It's nothing personal, just paperwork. Turns out the original filing had mistakes. My son was the rightful recipient, so we corrected it. That's all. Rightful recipient." Devon barked out a laugh, though nothing about it was funny. "Lady, I bought that cabin. It's paid every cent. No bank, no loan. That's mine." Karen tilted her head, lips curling into a polite smile. "I'm afraid the records don't say that anymore. That's fraud," Devon snapped. "You can't just sign off on property that doesn't belong to you?" Karen's voice dropped low. "Careful with your words. Accusing someone of fraud is serious, especially someone like me. I have a lot of friends in this community, Devon, people who respect what I've built here. You don't want to make this ugly. Devon stepped closer, locking eyes with her. You already made it ugly when you broke into my home and shoved my life into boxes. For a moment, the mask slipped. Her smile tightened, her eyes narrowing, but then she waved a hand dismissively and turned back to her flowers. If you feel so strongly, go hire a lawyer. Until then, Brandon has every right to stay. I'd suggest you avoid causing a scene. The arrogance in her tone hit harder than any letter. This wasn't about the cabin anymore, it was about power. She was daring him to fight. Daring him to step out of line so she could call the cops and paint him as the problem. That night, Devon sat on the tailgate of his truck, staring out over the lake. Across the water, laughter rang out Brandon, throwing yet another party at what used to be Devon's cabin. Music thumped, bottles clinked, voices shouted, Dot and Devon sat there, gripping the deed in his hands, knowing one thing for certain, this wasn't over. Asterisk, every sound from that cabin felt like a knife twisting deeper into Devon's chest. The laughter, the clinking bottles, the music, all reminders of what had been stolen from him. His phone buzzed. A message from his sister lit up the screen. Any luck? Devon's reply was sharp, his thumbs hitting the screen with force. They faked paperwork. HOA president signed it over to her son. A pause. Then Denise fired back. You're kidding me. That's criminal. You're not letting them win, are you? Devon stared at her words, his jaw tight. Not a chance, he typed. At that moment, Devon knew this fight wasn't going to be won with polite conversations or by hoping the system would suddenly play fair. If Karen could twist paperwork, she could twist perception. She could convince the neighbors he was dangerous, that he didn't belong, that he was the problem. And the worst part? They'd believe her. They always had. But Devon wasn't like the others she'd bullied before. He'd spent his life fighting uphill battles. He knew how to build, how to strategize, and most importantly, how to document everything. And while Karen thought a forged signature could erase him, Devon was already building a case that would expose her for what she really was. The breaking point came one Sunday morning. Devon had spent the night in his truck, parked just outside the cabin. His eyes were bloodshot, his neck stiff, his body sore from trying to sleep upright. But when he stepped out to stretch, the sight waiting for him sent rage coursing through his veins. Brandon was sitting on the porch, shirtless, sipping coffee. But not just from any mug, from Devon's mug. The one his daughter had painted when she was 6. Crooked blue letters spelling out Dad's cabin. Seeing it in Brandon's hands was like a punch to the gut. Put that down. Devon snapped, storming up the steps. Brandon leaned back in the rocking chair, grinning. What's the matter? Little attached to your coffee cup? It's not just a cup. Devon's voice shook with fury, exhaustion mixing with rage. That's mine. This whole place is mine. Brandon smirked. Not according to the records. Mom fixed everything. You're squatting, Matthews. Get used to it. Devon stepped closer, close enough to smell the whiskey laced in Brandon's morning coffee. His voice was low, dangerous. You don't know me. I don't quit. You think your mom's signature erases me. I'll take this to the county, to the state. I'll fight you every way there is. Brandon set the mug down on the railing and stood, chest puffed. You really think anyone's gonna side with you over my mom? She runs this lake. People trust her. You're just a contractor who thought he could buy his way in. Devon's fists clenched, knuckles whitening. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. What's going on here? Karen. She stood at the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She looked almost smug, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Devon turned on her, his voice sharp and raw. "What's going on? Is your son living in a house that doesn't belong to him? You faked paperwork, boxed up my life, and now you're letting him drink from a mug my little girl made me. How do you justify that?" Karen's lips curled into that thin, practiced smile. "Oh, Devon, no one faked anything. We corrected an error. The association decided it was in the community's best interest for Brandon to take ownership." Devon let out a bitter laugh. "Community's best interest? You mean your best interest? Asterisk, you mean you pulled strings because you thought?" "I wouldn't fight back," Devon shot back. His voice low but steady. Brandon stepped between them, cocky grin plastered on his face. "Face it, man, you lost. Walk away before you embarrass yourself even more." Devon's eyes darted from Brandon to Karen. The weight of the fight pressed hard on his chest, but deep inside, something else was burning a stubborn flame. The same one that had carried him through years of backbreaking. Labor when quitting would have been easier. "You don't get to tell me when I've lost," he said firmly. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Karen tilted her head, voice coated in honey but sharp as glass. "Be careful, Devon. Anger doesn't look good on you. The more you lash out, the more this community will see who the real problem is." Devon forced himself to breathe. She was baiting him, daring him to explode so she could twist the story in her favor. But he wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, he turned, walked back to his truck, climbed onto the tailgate, and sat down. His heart was pounding, his hands trembling, but his eyes never left them. He wanted them to know he wasn't going anywhere. "Not today. Not tomorrow, Karen." Slid her sunglasses back into place, exchanged a glance with Brandon, and the two retreated inside. From the cabin, Brandon's laughter echoed through the walls, but Devon stayed planted. He sat there until the sun dipped low, streaks of orange and pink stretching across the lake. When his sister called, worried again, he gave her the same answer he whispered to himself. "I'm not backing down." Because this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about dignity. About not letting arrogance and power trample years of sacrifice. But Devon knew brute force wouldn't win this war. He needed precision, strategy. Proof. The first step: documentation. He photographed everything, his deed. The boxes shoved onto his porch, Brandon's loud parties spilling into his yard. Every notice Karen had ever taped to his door, time-stamped, backed up on multiple drives. If this went legal, he wouldn't show up with accusations, he'd show up with evidence. The second step: research. He spent hours at the county clerk's office, combing through records. There it was, the original deed, his name stamped clear as day. And then the so-called correction filed under Brandon's name, vague, riddled with jargon, claiming a clerical oversight with no supporting documents. Sean. The clerk leaned in and admitted quietly, "Usually, corrections like this require a court order or at least signatures from all parties. This one's unusual." "Unusual," Devon repeated. "Or illegal." Sean hesitated. "I can't say that, but I can tell you it's not standard procedure." Devon left with copies of everything. His folder was thick now, enough for a good lawyer to tear apart. Money was tight, but if it came down to going broke or losing the cabin, he already knew his choice. The third step: patience. He forced himself to play the long game. Every weekend, he showed up. Sometimes he sat by the water, fishing just to remind them he was still there. Other times, he parked across the road, notebook in hand, jotting down license plates of every car that came and went from his stolen porch. One Saturday, Brandon swaggered out, clearly irritated. "You seriously just gonna sit there all day? You look pathetic, man." Devon didn't even look up from his notepad. "Pathetic," he said evenly. "Is living in a house your mom stole for you?" Brandon's smirk faltered, just for a moment. Before he forced out a laugh, "Keep talking. We'll see how fast the sheriff shows up when I say you threatened me." Devon snapped his notebook shut and finally met Brandon's eyes. Funny thing about threats. Asterisk, the remark caught Brandon off guard. For once, he didn't have a smart comeback. Instead, he just sneered and stormed back inside, slamming the door. That tiny crack in Brandon's armor was all Devon needed. Was proof the plan was working. They expected him to lash out, to rage, to break. But instead, Devon was patient, disciplined. And that scared them more than anger ever could. But behind Devon's calm eyes, a storm was brewing. Every photo he took, every note he wrote, every document he collected, it wasn't just evidence. On the back pages of his notebook, he was sketching something new: a fence. Not just any fence, but one that cut straight across the main access. The road every HOA board member used to reach their lakeside office. If the Whitfields wanted to treat his cabin like it was theirs, then he'd treat their office like it was his property line. This fence wasn't just wood and nails. It was a message. You can push me, but you will not erase me. But Devon also knew. Once that fence went up, the fight would no longer be quiet. It would be loud, public, and impossible for the HOA to control. On a gray Saturday morning, the plan came to life. The lake was wrapped in fog, the kind of weather that kept neighbors indoors perfect cover. In the back of his truck sat stacks of lumber, buckets of concrete mix, and a coil of heavy-duty chain to anyone passing by. It might not look like much, but Devon knew exactly what it would become. He parked right at the edge of the access road. The strip of land wasn't technically private, but a sliver of it was his. And he knew his boundaries better than anyone. If the HOA refused to respect those lines, he was going to carve them into the earth himself as he unloaded the lumber. A familiar voice called out, "Mrs. Green." His elderly neighbor shuffled closer, cardigan clutched against the wind. "What are you doing with all that wood?" she asked, curious but cautious. Devon gave her a small smile, building a reminder. Reminder of what? That this is my land, and they don't get to erase me. She blinked, then gave a quiet nod. Before heading back inside, no more questions. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about the feud. Now they were just waiting to see if Devon actually had the backbone to stand against Karen's empire. By midday, the framework of the fence was rising. Tall, sturdy beams sunk deep into concrete, positioned perfectly to make it impossible for a car to pass without wrecking itself. Devon's arms ached. Sweat drenched his shirt, but with every swing of the hammer, he felt stronger. Every nail he drove in was a rebuttal to Karen's lectures about community harmony. Every plank was a reminder, I belong here. It wasn't long before Brandon arrived. His black SUV screeched to a stop, bass thumping from the speakers. He jumped out, hands on his hips. What the hell is this? Devon didn't even pause. It's called a fence. My property, my right. You can't block this road, Brandon barked. The HOA uses it every day. That's the point, Devon said calmly, lifting another beam into place. They pretend my land doesn't matter. So I'm making sure they can't ignore it. Brandon's face turned red. Mom's gonna bury you for this. You're finished. Devon set the hammer down, locked eyes with him, and said, You've been saying that for weeks, but I'm still here. Maybe I'm not the one who's finished. Before Brandon could snap back, more neighbors began drifting over. First 2, then 5, then a small crowd. Some clutching coffee mugs, some holding their kids' hands. They came to watch the man who dared build a wall against the people who had ruled their neighborhood for over a decade. Some whispered, about time someone stood up to them. Others shook their heads. HOA lawyers are gonna crush him. But Devon just kept building. By late afternoon, the fence was complete, a towering barrier stretching across the road. At its center, he nailed a massive sheet of plywood and stapled his deed right onto it. The bold letters made it impossible to miss. Owner Devon Matthews, and, beneath it, in thick black spray paint, "This is my land." That was the moment Karen arrived. Her silver Mercedes screeched to a halt. She stepped out slowly, sunglasses pulled from her face, eyes sharp as knives. Brandon paced beside her like a rabid dog, but she just stared at Devon. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Protecting what's mine," Devon answered. "This is obstruction. This is vandalism. This is legal." Devon cut her off, pointing at the deed stapled to the fence. "Check the boundaries. This strip has always been mine." "You tried to erase me with paperwork?" "So I reminded everyone with wood and nails." The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Others whispered nervously. Karen's jaw tightened. She couldn't order the fence down not without drawing attention to the very documents she had twisted to. Steal his cabin. The standoff was tense, silent, until headlights appeared. A local reporter, tipped off by a neighbor, pulled up with a camera crew. The microphone pointed at Devon first. "Sir, can you tell us what's happening here?" Devon straightened. Sweat streaked across his face. "The HOA president stole my cabin with false paperwork. So I built this to prove I'm not going anywhere. They wanted to bury me in silence. Well, now the whole town knows." The camera swung to Karen. She scrambled for words about community standards and safety concerns. But no one was buying it. The deed was right there. The fence was real. And Devon's determination was undeniable. For the first time in years, Karen Whitfield wasn't in control. But that fence didn't just divide the land, it divided the town. It was no longer just wood and nails, it was a landmark. Not yet, but it was enough for Devon to feel the shift. Karen, however, wasn't the type to lose gracefully. She was regrouping, and Devon knew her next move would be bigger, louder, and far more dangerous by midweek. The tension around the lake was impossible to ignore. The fence wasn't just blocking the HOA's main road anymore, it was blocking Karen's control. And Karen Whitfield did not sit quietly while her authority slipped away. On Wednesday morning, Devon arrived to find 2 sheriff's cruisers parked by the fence. Karen stood there, polished and smug, speaking to the deputies with her usual confidence. Brandon leaned against his SUV, smirking like he'd already won. Devon's chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. With a folder of documents in hand, he walked straight toward them. "There he is," Karen announced, pointing dramatically. "The man obstructing community property. I want him removed immediately." The deputy, a broad-shouldered man with a mustache, raised his hand. "Mr. Matthews, is this your land?" Devon opened the folder, pulling out the deed and county maps. "Yes, sir. Right here. This road cuts directly through my property and the fence. It's well within my boundary lines, legal and documented." The deputy compared the papers to the county's records on his tablet. Silence stretched. Karen's eyes narrowed, waiting for her victory. Finally, the deputy looked up. "He's right. This land belongs to Mr. Matthews." Karen's voice shot up an octave. "That road is vital to the community. The association depends on it." The deputy stayed calm. "That may be true, ma'am, but legally, this is his property. He's within his rights to build this fence." The gathered crowd buzzed with whispers. Brandon pushed off the SUV, snapping, "So you're just gonna let him block us? This is harassment." Devon stepped forward, voice steady. "Harassment is breaking into my cabin. Harassment is changing my locks and boxing up my belongings. This fence, It's the only thing keeping me from being erased by your lies." The crowd stirred. Cameras caught every word. The deputy sighed, clearly tired of the spectacle. "This looks like a civil matter, not criminal. If either of you wants change, you'll need to take it to court." Karen's composure cracked. "Court? This man is making a mockery of me." Devon's lips curled into the faintest smile. "No, Karen, you did that yourself." The deputies left, refusing to intervene. Karen spun on her heel, dragging Brandon with her as cameras followed. That night, the footage aired across local news stations. Homeowner builds fence against HOA president sparks community battle. By Thursday, Devon's phone was blowing up. Strangers from across the state were reaching out for encouragement, sharing their own HOA horror stories. He hadn't asked for attention, but it found him. The story spread beyond Pell City, picked up by regional outlets hungry for drama. That evening, Karen stormed into an emergency HOA meeting at the community center. Devon wasn't invited, but neighbors later filled him in. Karen demanded a unanimous vote to fine Devon thousands of dollars for unauthorized construction and for creating hostility in the neighborhood. But for the first time in 12 years, the vote didn't go her way. Some board members abstained. One Mr. Harris flat out refused. "This isn't about bylaws," he said. "This is about you using your position to steal." When Devon heard that, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just his fight anymore. People were finally seeing through Karen's facade. 2 days later, a letter arrived in Devon's mailbox, official HOA stationery, signed by Karen herself. It demanded the fence be removed within 72 hours or face escalating fines and possible litigation. Devon stared at the letter, then shook his head. Instead of tearing it up, he pinned it right next to the deed on the fence for everyone to see. Underneath, he spray-painted 2 words in bold red letters: "Try me." That weekend, the standoff reached new heights. Protesters gathered, some waving signs that read "Property Rights Matter," others siding with Karen, chanting that rules keep communities safe. Local TV vans lined the roadside dot, and in the middle of it all, Devon stood by his fence. Unshaken, knowing the battle was no longer just his, it was a fight that was reshaping the entire community.